Today I want to talk to you about a vegetable that has been framed, set up, scapegoated, blamed for crimes it didn't commit by a dietary culture that needed a villain and picked the wrong suspect. The potato did not make you fat. The potato did not spike your blood sugar into oblivion. The potato did not derail your health goals. What did those things, if anything, was what you put on the potato, what you did to the potato before you ate it, and the 30 years of nutritional misinformation that told you to fear it in the first place. The potato is one of the most nutritionally complete foods on the planet. It fed empires. It saved populations from starvation. It is the only food a human being has been documented to survive on almost exclusively for extended periods, with full health maintained. Today, we are giving the potato its day in court. Evidence will be presented. Witnesses will be called, and by the end of this episode, I am confident you will never look at a potato the same way again. This is Eat or Die, Stories from the Human Table, a podcast from Renegade Health Group. I'm Zach Sykes. Each episode, we take one ingredient, a nutrient, a food, a molecule, and then we follow it through history, through biology, through your daily life. Last episode, we talked about sugar, one of the most damaging things the modern food supply has done to human health, and the documented industry manipulation behind 50 years of misdirection. It was a heavy episode, but it was important. Today is different. Today, we rehabilitate. The potato. Solanum tuberosum is a member of the nightshade family, native to the Andes Mountains of South America, and the fourth largest food crop in the world by volume after wheat, rice, and corn. It has fed more people in more places across more centuries than almost any other food, and it has spent the last 3 decades being blamed for an obesity epidemic that was caused by the things we did to it and the things we ate alongside it, but not by the potato itself. Let's set that record straight. A potato is a tuber, a swollen underground stem that a plant uses to store energy. Not a root, technically, though we treat it like one and call it one. The plant accumulates starch in the tuber as a reserve, drawing on it during winter dormancy or drought to survive until the next growing season. When you eat a potato, you are eating a plant's survival strategy. Concentrated, organized, efficient energy storage that happens to be extraordinarily useful for human nutrition. A medium baked potato, skin on, nothing added, contains roughly 160 calories, 4 grams of protein, 37 grams of carbohydrate, 4 grams of fiber, virtually no fat, and meaningful vitamin C, B6, folate, magnesium, iron, and significant potassium, more serving than a banana, a fact that surprises almost everyone. It is one of the most nutritionally dense starchy foods available, scores at the top of the satiety index, a measure of how filling a food is per calorie, ranking higher than eggs, cheese, beef, and most other foods tested. The skin matters. The skin contains the majority of the fiber, a significant proportion of the micronutrients, and protective antioxidant compounds. Eating a potato without its skin is nutritionally different from eating it with. Keep the skin. There are over 4,000 known varieties of potato worldwide. The Andes alone, where the potato originated, still grow hundreds of varieties in colors ranging from white and yellow to deep purple and red, in shapes from round to fingerling to flat, and flavors and textures that bear little resemblance to the russet that dominates the American commercial market. We'll return to variety later. Now, the history. The potato was domesticated in the Andes Mountains of what is now southern Peru and northwestern Bolivia somewhere between 8,000 and 10,000 years ago. This makes it one of the oldest cultivated crops in the Americas, and one of the oldest anywhere. The civilization of the Andes, culminating in the Inca Empire at the height of the 15th and early 16th centuries, they didn't simply grow potatoes. They developed a sophisticated agricultural science around them over millennia. Andean farmers cultivated hundreds of distinct varieties, each adapted to specific altitudes, soils, and climatic conditions. They understood, through accumulated generations of observation, that different varieties had different properties, some better for boiling, some for roasting, some more resistant to frost, some higher in protein. At high altitudes, where temperatures drop below freezing at night even in summer, the Andean peoples developed one of history's most ingenious food preservation techniques. Chuño. Potatoes were spread on the ground on freezing nights, allowed to freeze solid, then exposed to the intense high-altitude sun during the day. That freeze-thaw cycle, repeated over several days, broke down the cell structure. Farmers then walked across the potatoes barefoot, pressing out the remaining water. The result? A dried, lightweight, shelf-stable product that could be stored for years without spoiling. Chuño is, in effect, a form of freeze-drying developed thousands of years before the industrial process that produces the same result. It allowed the Inca to maintain strategic food reserves across their empire, stored in vast storehouses at strategic points along the road network, available to feed armies, feed laborers on state construction projects, and buffer against crop failures across the vast geographical range of that empire. The potato was not a humble peasant food in the Andes. It was a strategic resource, a technological achievement, and a nutritional foundation upon which one of the great civilizations of the pre-Columbian Americas was built. When Spanish conquistadors arrived in the Andes in the 1530s, they encountered the potato and were, with some notable exceptions, thoroughly unimpressed. The potato arrived in Europe around 1570, likely carried by Spanish sailors who had eaten it on the journey. And Europe, in its collective wisdom, regarded it with deep suspicion for the better part of 2 centuries. The reasons were numerous and mostly wrong. The potato is a member of the nightshade family, which includes several genuinely poisonous plants. European botanists, recognizing the family resemblance, assumed the worst. The potato's leaves and green-tinged skin do contain solanine, a mildly toxic alkaloid, which gave credibility to these fears, even though the tuber itself is safe when properly grown and stored. The potato did not appear in the Bible, which some clergy took as evidence of its suspect nature. It grew underground, in the dark, which carried dark associations in European folk culture, not entirely positive. The French called it pomme de terre, apple of the earth, but didn't eat it. The Germans fed it to pigs. The English regarded it as peasant food at best. For over a century, the potato sat at the margins of European agriculture, grown experimentally, eaten reluctantly, and mistrusted broadly. Then came Frederick the Great of Prussia. Frederick, with his military clarity, understood what the potato could do for his kingdom. It produced more calories per acre than grain. It grew underground, protected from the scorching and trampling that kept destroying the surface crops during military campaigns. It could feed a population through that bad grain harvest, which, in the famines that lethally and frequently devastated 18th century Europe, that potato was potential insurance. The problem for Frederick was convincing his subjects to grow it. So Frederick issued royal edicts ordering peasants to cultivate potatoes, and they ignored him. He threatened to cut off their noses and ears of those who refused. The threats were surprisingly largely ineffective. So, in 1774, facing a famine, Frederick tried something different. He sent a wagon of potatoes to the starving town, but surrounded it with royal guards, and ordered the guards to watch the potatoes, but not too carefully. Sure enough, the people stole them, planted them, ate them, and told their neighbors. Frederick the Great defeated European potato skepticism, not with mandates, but with reverse psychology. It is one of history's more charming public health interventions. Antoine Augustin Parmentier, a French pharmacist who had survived on potatoes while a prisoner of war in Prussia, ran a similar campaign in France with a little more theatrical flair. He planted potato fields right outside Paris, guarded them heavily during the day, but then removed the guards at night so Parisians could sneak in and take the tubers. Marie Antoinette began to wear potato flowers in her hair at court, and the potato became fashionable. France began to eat it seriously. By the early 19th century, the potato had transformed European agriculture. Yields per acre increased dramatically, and along with it, population growth accelerated. And the potato, more than any other single factor, is credited by historians with fueling that population expansion of the 18th and 19th century. Families that would have subsisted through grain shortages on the edge of starvation found in the potato a calorie-dense, nutritionally rich, easily grown crop that changed the arithmetic of survival. Nowhere was this transformation more total and more fatally consequential than in Ireland. Ireland in the 18th and early 19th centuries was, in agricultural terms, a colony organized for British benefit. The best land was owned by absentee English landlords and used to produce grain and cattle for export to Britain. Irish tenant farmers, paying rents that they could barely afford on land they did not own, were left with small plots of poor soil to try to feed their families. The potato was perfectly suited to this situation. It grew in poor soil. It grew in small plots. And it produced extraordinary calorie yields per acre. A family could subsist on a surprisingly small piece of land if that land grew potatoes. And it was nutritious enough to sustain life. The Irish poor ate potatoes with buttermilk and little else. And they were, by the standards of the era, reasonably healthy. The potato's combination of carbohydrate, protein, vitamin C, and potassium made it about as complete a single food as they could find. Irish potato consumption at its peak was staggering. Adult men in rural Ireland were eating 8 to 14 pounds of potatoes per day. Not as a side dish, as essentially the entire diet. By 1845, approximately one-third of Ireland's population, around 3 million people at the time, was entirely dependent on the potato for the majority of their calories. And mostly a single variety, the Irish lumper. Very high yielding, well adapted to Irish conditions, but genetically uniform, almost to the point of being a clone of itself across the country's potato fields. Genetic uniformity is catastrophic vulnerability. In the summer of 1845, a water mold arrived in Ireland, likely from North America. It spread through the genetically identical potato fields with terrifying speed. The leaves blackened, the tubers rotted in the ground. Entire harvests turned to black, stinking slime in a matter of days. The blight returned in 1846, and 1847, and 1848. For 7 consecutive years, the Irish potato crop failed catastrophically. What followed was one of the defining catastrophes of the 19th century. Between 1845 and 1852, approximately 1 million people died of starvation and the diseases that follow it: typhus, dysentery, scurvy. Another million emigrated in the famine years alone. Ireland's population, which had stood at approximately 8.2 million before the famine, fell to 6.5 million by 1851 and continued to fall through emigration for decades afterwards. Today's population in Ireland is still lower than it was in 1845. And as we noted in the grains episode, throughout the famine, Ireland continued to export food. Grain, cattle, butter, and other agricultural products left Irish ports under British commercial law while people starved in the fields. The famine was a natural disaster ignited by a pathogen, but it was also a political catastrophe enabled by the colonial economic structures that prioritized the property rights of landlords and the free market principles of the British government over the survival of 1 million people. The potato did not cause the famine. The monoculture caused the famine. The dependency caused the famine. The colonial system that created that dependency caused the famine. The potato was just the instrument. The structures built around it were the tragedy. This distinction matters for how we think about the potato today. It's not a dangerous food. It's an extraordinary food that was, in one terrible, very memorable moment in history, deployed with too little variety and too much dependence, and destroyed by a pathogen that its genetic uniformity made it helpless against. After the famine, the potato spread globally with a different demographic. Irish emigrants carried their relationship with it to America, to Australia, to wherever the diaspora landed. In the United States, the potato became a staple food of immigrant communities and eventually of the broader population. For most of the 20th century, the potato was simply considered a normal, healthy part of the diet. Then came the low-fat era, the same period as we discussed last episode when the sugar industry's funded research was distorting dietary guidelines. And as dietary fat was demonized, carbohydrates were elevated. Then, as the low-fat diet failed to deliver, the counter-reaction arrived. Low-carb diets, the Atkins revolution, and eventually paleo and keto, all of which identify carbohydrates as the enemy. The potato was caught in this crossfire. High in carbohydrates, associated with calorie-dense preparations like French fries and potato chips, and lacking the superfood marketing budget of a quinoa or acai, it was designated a dietary villain by a culture looking for simple answers to complex metabolic problems. That verdict was wrong. And the science, which we're about to get into, says so clearly. The professor is in, and the professor has been waiting to talk about resistant starch for 6 episodes. We are going to cover 3 things: why the potato is arguably the most nutritionally complete whole food available to most people, what resistant starch is and why it changes everything about how you think about potatoes, and why the way you cook a potato may matter as much as whether you eat one at all. Let's start with a remarkable historical experiment. In the 1920s, a pair of Arctic explorers, Vilhjalmur Stephenson and Karsten Andersen, agreed to eat nothing but meat for a full year under medical supervision at Bellevue Hospital in New York to test whether an all-meat diet was nutritionally adequate. It was, mostly. They remained healthy. What's less well known is that a different experiment, less formally documented, has been replicated across multiple individuals over multiple time periods, living on potatoes alone, with a small amount of fat added for palatability, for extended periods, weeks, months, with full health maintained. Chris Voigt, the executive director of the Washington State Potato Commission, yes, that's a thing, ate nothing but potatoes for 60 days in 2010. 20 pounds of potatoes per day. Nothing else. His cholesterol improved. His blood sugar improved. He lost 21 pounds. His physicians monitored him throughout and found no nutritional deficiencies. This is not a dietary recommendation. It's evidence. The potato contains, in quantities worth mentioning, a complete protein with all essential amino acids, very unusual for a plant food, vitamin C, vitamin B6, potassium, magnesium, folate, iron, zinc, niacin, and phosphorus. Add a small amount of fat. The Irish used buttermilk, or the butter or olive oil you might add. You cover essentially all human nutritional bases from a single food. No other starchy food comes close to this profile. Rice has almost no micronutrients. White bread is nutritionally hollow. Even sweet potato, which is excellent nutritionally, doesn't match the amino acid profile or the potassium density of the white potato. The potato is not a junk food wearing a vegetable costume. It is one of the most nutritionally serious foods available. Now, resistant starch. Pay attention because this is the part most people have never heard. Not all starch behaves the same way in your digestive system. Digestible starch, the kind in a freshly baked hot potato, is broken down rapidly by amylase enzymes in your small intestine, converted to glucose, absorbed, and raises blood sugar in the pattern that we've discussed at length in previous episodes. Resistant starch is different. Resistant starch, the name is quite specific, resists digestion in the small intestine. It passes through largely intact, reaches the large intestine, and is fermented by gut bacteria. In this respect, it behaves like fiber, not like starch. And, like fiber, its fermentation produces short-chain fatty acids, butyrate, propionate, and acetate, that feed the cells of the colon lining, reduce inflammation, support a healthy gut microbiome, and improve insulin sensitivity. Now here's the part that should make you stop and think. When you cook a potato and then cool it, the crystalline structure of the starch changes. Amylose, one of the 2 major starch molecules, retrogrades into a more tightly packed, resistant form. A potato that was high glycemic when hot becomes significantly lower glycemic when cooled. Studies have measured reductions in glycemic response of 25 to 50% in cooled versus freshly cooked potatoes. Reheating does not fully reverse this. The retrograded starch is more stable than the original structure, So a potato that has been cooked, cooled overnight in the refrigerator, and then reheated retains a meaningful proportion of its resistant starch content and delivers a significantly lower glycemic response than a freshly cooked potato of the same variety. This is not a minor finding. This is the practical key to eating potatoes intelligently. Cook them, cool them, eat them. Warm if you like. The cooling is the critical step. Your gut bacteria will thank you. Your blood sugar will thank you. And the professor will consider this segment a success. Now, one more mechanism worth understanding. Not all potatoes have the same glycemic profile, even before that cooking method is considered. Waxy potatoes, red potatoes, fingerlings, new potatoes, they have a different starch composition than floury potatoes like the russet. Waxy varieties contain more amylose relative to amylopectin, and amylose retrogrades more readily into resistant starch, both during cooling and during digestion. They also hold their structure better when cooked, which further slows digestion. Floury potatoes, the russet, the Idaho, your standard baking potato, they have a higher amylopectin content. They're fluffier, the more glycemic variety, perfectly nutritious, but the variety most commonly turned into French fries and baked potatoes, piled with sour cream and butter. Preparations that load dietary fat and calories onto an already fast digesting starch. The preparation is, frankly, where the potato gets framed for crimes committed by the cooking process. A medium baked russet is a reasonable food. The same potato deep fried in industrially processed seed oils, salted heavily, and eaten in quantities of several hundred grams, that's a different conversation entirely. The potato is not responsible for what we do to it. Here's the practical case for putting potatoes back on your plate and doing it intelligently. The single most useful thing I can tell you about potatoes is this: cook them the day before. Boil, steam, or bake your potatoes. Let them cool completely. Ideally refrigerate them overnight. Then eat them the next day, cold or reheated, however you prefer. The retrogradation of the starch that occurs during cooling significantly increases the resistant starch content and meaningfully reduces the glycemic impact of the meal. Potato salad, made with cooled potatoes and a vinegar-based dressing, is from a glycemic standpoint one of the best ways to eat a potato. The cooling increases resistant starch, and the vinegar, acetic acid, further blunts the glycemic response by slowing gastric emptying. This is not diet food. This is biochemistry working in your favor. Cold potato slices, reheated roasted potatoes from last night's dinner, a potato salad brought to a cookout. These are not compromises. They are, in metabolic terms, smarter choices than a freshly baked hot potato eaten immediately. The rule? Cook, cool, then eat. The refrigerator is doing nutritional work you don't have to. So not all potatoes are equal, as the professor alluded. Your best choices? Waxy varieties. Red potatoes, fingerling potatoes, new potatoes, even the Yukon Golds. Those are your best everyday options. Higher resistant starch potential, lower glycemic response, better micronutrient density relative to their calorie content. Eat these boiled or steamed with skin on, cooled and reheated, or in potato salads with vinegar-based dressing. Another great choice are your purple and blue potatoes. Less common, but increasingly available. They contain anthocyanins, the same antioxidant pigments found in blueberries and red cabbage. They have meaningfully higher antioxidant content than your white or yellow varieties, and a similar resistant starch profile to other waxy potatoes. If you can find them, eat them. Some good, but slightly less good choices. Yukon Gold. Technically a semi-waxy variety. It's an excellent all-purpose potato. Good flavor, reasonable glycemic profile. It works well in most preparations. If you're eating potatoes regularly and not thinking too hard about variety, Yukon Gold is a solid choice. Sweet potatoes also deserve mention as a companion food, but not a replacement. They have a different nutritional profile. They're higher in beta-carotene, they're lower in protein and potassium than your white potato, and a moderate glycemic index that is often overstated. A boiled sweet potato has significantly lower glycemic response than a baked one. The cell structure intact in boiling moderates that starch release in a way that dry heat doesn't. We'll return to sweet potatoes in another episode to do it justice. Now, the ones to eat thoughtfully. Russet and Idaho potatoes. Floury, high amylopectin, they're perfectly nutritious but higher glycemic than your waxy varieties. And they're more commonly prepared in high-calorie ways. Use the cooling trick consistently with these. Avoid frying them and keep the skin on. And try loading them with something useful rather than your calorie-dense toppings. Now the preparations to avoid. I think you guessed these. Deep fried potatoes. French fries or chips. They're a different food category than whole potatoes. The frying process, particularly in the industrially refined seed oils used in commercial frying, adds significant oxidized fat content, dramatically increases your caloric density, and destroys most of the nutritional value. This is not the potato's fault. This is what we've done to it. And commercially processed potato products, instant mashed potato, your boxed potato mixes, they have been processed to a degree that removes the resistant starch. Often they've added significant sodium and other additives and deliver a glycemic hit closer to a refined grain than the whole food that potatoes are. These are not potatoes in any meaningful nutritional sense. They are simply potato-flavored starch products. Eat potatoes 2 to 4 times per week as a primary carbohydrate source, prepared with skin on, using the cooling method where possible. This is a reasonable frequency for an active person with no significant blood sugar issues. If you have insulin resistance or type 2 diabetes, that cooling trick becomes more important, not less. The resistant starch benefit is most meaningful for people with the most to gain from lower glycemic responses. Use waxy varieties consistently. Consider vinegar-based preparations and monitor your individual response, which you probably are already with your continuous glucose monitors. They will show you clearly how your body responds to different potato preparations. Pair potatoes with protein and fat. A potato eaten alone has a higher glycemic impact than a potato eaten as part of a meal with chicken and olive oil. The protein and fat slow gastric emptying and moderate the glucose response. This is not complicated nutrition. This is eating like a normal human being who includes more than one food on their plate. Somewhere in the Andes right now, farmers are growing varieties of potato that have been cultivated continuously for 8,000 years. Hundreds of varieties, in colors and shapes that most of the world has never seen, descended from the plant that fed the Inca Empire, that Frederick the Great tricked his subjects into planting, that sustained the Irish poor for 2 centuries before a pathogen and a colonial system combined to destroy them. The potato has been through more than most foods. It has saved civilizations and been implicated in one of history's great tragedies. It has been feared, dismissed, criminalized by dietary culture, and vindicated by the science of resistant starch, and a man who ate nothing but potatoes for 60 days and came out healthier than he went in. It does not deserve the reputation it has acquired. It deserves a place at your table. Cook it well, cool it overnight, eat it with the skin on. Eat accordingly. Well, that's episode 6 of Eat or Die, Stories from the Human Table. I'm Zach Sykes, Renegade Health Group. If you've been avoiding potatoes for the last 5 years because someone told you carbs were the enemy, I hope this episode gave you permission to reconsider. The evidence is on the potato side. Share this one with whoever in your life is still eating cauliflower and mashed potatoes out of dietary guilt. They deserve better. So does the cauliflower, honestly. That's not what it's for. Find us on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube at Renegade Health Group. Leave a review if you've got a minute. We're building something here, and your support genuinely matters. I'd like to keep this thing ad-free, but for that we will need to work together. If you found value here, consider becoming a member on Patreon. I post episode scripts and show notes, sources referenced, season schedules, and I may even entertain the idea of a one-off special episode for my biggest supporters. Next episode, we go back to the micronutrients. Vitamin D, the one your body makes from sunlight. The one most people living above the 37th parallel are deficient in for half the year. And the one with perhaps the broadest documented role in human health of any single vitamin. Immune function, bone density, mood, cardiovascular health, cancer risk, vitamin D touches all of it. It's a big story. We'll tell it properly. Until then, eat well and rehabilitate your potato.